Hello and welcome to History by Hollywood, a podcast series that examines the real events and people behind fact-based movies. This is episode 74 for the 7th of June 2020, and this week's movie is 1980's The Coal Miner's Daughter, starring Sissy Spacek as country singing star Loretta Lynn. My name is Andrew Bliszczyk, and this week I'm joined as ever by Martin Darlington. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Andrew. Hello, everybody. And great to have you back, Andrew.
Been a while.
Yeah, it has. It was fantastic having Des back on, but the logistics of it meant we couldn't really do the three-way that we did with Break and Moran. So it was down to me, but largely Des, and it was great to have him back on, and we will attempt to get him back on as soon as possible. Just firstly, in updates in errata, we do have to apologise for yet further changes to the planned episode sequence. We do try and keep to the plan, and we're very aware that some of you guys like to read ahead. Gary Shavit, I'm looking at you, buddy. But sometimes work, family commitments and real life just get in the way. So we have had to chop and change a little bit. However, in very positive news, we have just received a rather lovely review. This is from Maxac23 from the United States. He gives us 5 stars, and the title is A Perfect Podcast.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. Maxac writes, given the state of the world, this has been an incredible podcast to escape a bit and dive back into some of the best movies of all time. The hosts are engaging and entertaining and pull no punches in their critiques of historical accuracy or inaccuracy. Brackets, who knew that Spartans didn't actually fight in diapers? Close brackets. It's been a blast to revisit these movies, and I've learnt a ton about history as well as some of the behind-the-scenes intel about the movies themselves. Look forward to listening to more. Please keep it going. Maxat23, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, that if we gave out coffee cups for good reviews, you'd be getting one. But unfortunately, we don't yet. Maybe when we take over the podcasting world, we'll actually get a merchandise line out and running. So we've had some listener feedback.
We've heard from Nick Parkinson, who's just listened to the Zulu Dawn episode. Nick echoed our feelings about Des Latham's forthcoming series on Stalingrad. All of us very much looking forward to that, and we'll be sure to bring you the news when it becomes available. Good friend of the pod, Sean Munger, sent in his customary review email, as did Gary Shavit, and both were very nice to us and both very complimentary toward Des's input, something with which we both thoroughly agree, and we'll ensure we get Des back as soon as possible when a suitable opportunity arises. Sean also mentions that on his and Cody's Green Screen podcast, where they examine movies from an environmental perspective, they're planning to cover Lawrence of Arabia, which will be fascinating, and that film is also very firmly on our list. Gary Shavit again, he's noticed an interesting indicator that the brown stuff is about to hit the fan in any movie featuring aristocratic British characters. If one of them says splendid, it's all about to kick off. We thought that this was a bit like a US cavalryman versus the Native American movies, where the lieutenant will see, I don't like this, Sergeant. It's too quiet, which is always the cue for an arrow to appear in his chest a few seconds later. So thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I did like that. We also heard back from Seth, who was the chap who asked what we felt was the least accurate movie we'd covered, and we'll just leave that hanging out there. And I got into an email conversation with Seth about the Bosnian conflict after a comment. Seth has obviously been listening to the back catalogue, and apparently at the end of Schindler's List I made a comment about comparing Milosevic to Hitler, which I don't remember making, so I must listen back. But anyway, kudos to Seth, he's certainly well up on his modern history. We also heard from Dr. Phil Pomerantz, who wrote in about Larry Flint, Zulu Dawn, and also mentioned Midway. Well, I recently watched Midway, which is, I think, 4 or 5 movies ahead in our list, and I can recommend it a lot more enthusiastically than one might imagine from the very poor critic reviews. I think critics are in the 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, but audiences put it in the 90%, so I'm not sure I'd quite go that high, but slightly exaggerated CGI scenes, which, as one reviewer pithily said, do appear to come from a galaxy far, far away. And the main character comes across as a bit of a cliche until you do a little bit of reading up on him and find out, no, that's pretty much what he was like. So, yeah, it's worth watching. And on the Facebook page, listener Matthew Newton asked an interesting question about the differences in the language used in film credits, why some actors' names will be listed under starring, whereas others will be introducing or with or guest starring, and why some names appear above and below the title. Well, as Mark surmised, and we thought as well, the above or below the title is just really whether the film title itself on a film poster. It's a contractual thing sorted out with actors and their agents, and it's obviously, it sort of reflects how prestigious that actor is seen at that point in his career. But not being industry insiders, we actually emailed our friendly neighbourhood film professor, Mark Dupre, in Rochester, New York, and Mark was kind enough to shed some light on the aspects, largely what I've just told you. But he did point out this is more a commercial issue rather than cinematographical, if that's indeed a word. So he is consulting with a director friend of his, which is very kind of Mark. So we're just waiting for some of those details to come back. The one thing he did point out, he said when it says introducing, it will usually be that actor's first major role, and the one I do remember seeing was Michael Caine in Zulu, and it was his first role where he would be considered one of the leading actors. So for more detailed differences, we await enlightenment with interest. If you would like to message us, you can get us at email at hosts@historybyhollywood.com, or you can visit the website historybyhollywood.com, and there's a contact form you can fill out there. You can find us on Twitter at historybyhwood, or on Facebook, where the page is facebook.com/historybyhollywood. And if anyone has a few dollars knocking around and you would like to contribute to the admittedly modest costs of running the website and the show, then on the About page on the website, there is a click button that says Buy Now. And as we've pointed out before to the veterans of the show, you'll know that the only thing you're buying is our gratitude, but each time I try and change that button to donate, it crashes the whole system, so we've just left it with Buy Now.
Typical History by Hollywood professionalism there.
Absolutely.
So shall we get on with the story of the movie?
Yes, shall we don our 10-gallon hats, pull on our dancing boots and kick some dirt as we get down to the coal miner's daughter. And as ever, just before we go into the story of the movie, I must point out it's not the most widely available movie. I believe it is available in the US on a lot of, it's often shown on a lot of the, I'm not sure if it's on public television, but certainly on most of the cable services will have it. But globally, it's not the easiest film to find. If you can find it, it's a good watch. But we must point out there are very, very few clips available, and the sources we normally use for our clips, most of them seem to be someone in a cinema or watching at home, videoing it on a handy cam. So not the best quality. So I'm afraid the only clips you're going to hear is the intro music, which you'll hear at the end of the story of the movie, which is Sissy Spacek singing the song, The Coal Miner's Daughter, and our outro will be Loretta Lynn singing The Coal Miner's Daughter. So you'll be able to compare and just see how well Sissy did singing. But now, without further ado, he says, after a fair amount of ado up to this point, Andrew's going to take you through the story of the movie.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, Coal Miner's Daughter was released in 1980, and as we've said, it stars Sissy Spacek as the lead role, with Tommy Lee Jones as Loretta Lynn's husband, Doolittle Mooney Lynn. It also stars Beverly D'Angelo as Loretta Lynn's great friend, Patsy Cline. Both Sissy Spacek and Beverly D'Angelo do all their own singing in the movie, and they do a mighty impressive job as well. Sissy was chosen by Loretta herself to play Loretta Lynn, and it's a role that she was initially wary about accepting. In an effort to put the studio off casting her without actually saying no, Spacek insisted on doing all of her own singing, which she thought would put the studio off, but it didn't, and she got to sing and does so spectacularly. Loretta Lynn herself says that she finds the movie hard to watch, mainly due to the portrayal of her father by Levon Helm, who was performing in his first movie role, primarily being a musician, his normal day job. Helm would go on to feature in another History by Hollywood movie, The Right Stuff, as Chuck Yeager's friend, Jack Ridley, who would hand him a stick of gum before his record-breaking flights. It was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, but the movie only won 1 Oscar, which was Best Actress for Sissy Spacek. And she won the Golden Globe in the same category, and the movie also won Best Comedy or Musical Drama, a Golden Globe. To date, the Oscar is Sissy Spacek's only win, even though she's been nominated 6 times.
Yeah, now in 2019, the Library of Congress selected Coal Miner's Daughter for preservation in the United States National Film Registry, defining it as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Critically acclaimed, the movie shows a rare concord between critics and audiences, rated at 86% by both groups, so very healthy scores. It was also a financial hit. It cost $15 million to make, and yet it made over $67 million at the box office, nearly all of that from North America, as its global appeal was probably slightly limited. And a point of interest, Loretta Webb, her maiden name, she wasn't the only family member who proved a talented singer. Her younger sister Brenda Gale Webb would also become a professional singer, performing under the name Crystal Gale. Her 1977 hit Don't It Make My Brown Eyes... Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue, becoming an international hit. Another sister, Peggy Sue, also enjoyed brief singing success in the late 1960s. So, quite a talented family. And quite a talented actress portraying Loretta Lynn. And with that, we will hear her, Sissy Spacek's opening bars of The Coal Miner's Daughter now, and we'll listen to Loretta at the end of the show. For those listening on YouTube, I'm afraid because of all the copyright issues we have with YouTube and this music, you're probably just going to hear Robinson Crusoe's theme again. So sorry about that.
Well, I was born the coal miner's daughter in a cabin on a hill in Butcher Holler. We were poor, but we had love. That's the one thing my daddy made sure of. He shoveled coal to make a poor man's dollar.
Okay, so The Coal Miner's Daughter synopsis and reality check. In the movie, the opening scene tells us it's 1946 and we see a young woman, Loretta Webb, played by Sissy Spacek, riding a donkey through wooded hills, dragging a sled with a young boy sat on it. Meanwhile, we see a coal mine with miners blasting out a tunnel, and then at the coal head, a man in an army uniform drives up in a red Willis Jeep. The driver, Doolittle Mooney Lynn, Tommy Lee Jones is the actor playing him, is telling assembled men at the mine head that his Jeep can get to the top of the hill behind them. Bets are taken as Do struggles to get enough grip, watched by cheering and jeering miners, but eventually he makes the climb. Loretta laughs at the spectacle as her father, Ted, played by Lee Van Helm, scoffs at all this effort just to climb a car up a pile of mud. Back at the Webb house, we learn that Loretta is 14 and nearly 14, considered a grown woman, and also that she has a host of younger brothers and sisters. So, for setting the scene, how do they do at the kickoff, Andrew, on the reality?
Well, the opening scene, we see them in real time, almost adults meeting for the first time. Loretta Webb and her soon-to-be husband, Doolittle Mooney Lynn, and they do a pretty good job. They do a very good job, in fact. And just to set the scene of how we got to this point in time in 1946, I'll let the listeners know that Loretta Webb was born in 1932. That's the height of the Depression in Butcher's Hollow, Kentucky. She was the oldest daughter in a family of 8 children, and the scenes that we see of this destitute family scraping by are very accurate, apparently, as all these scenes were filmed in and around her hometown of Butcher's Hollow, Kentucky. Her parents lived a tough existence. They lived off the land where they could, and her father indeed was a coal miner, with all the hazards and dangers that came with the job at that time. Her father, Ted, would die at the relatively young age of 52 from, you guessed it, black lung disease. Butcher's Hollow was also the real birthplace of Doolittle Lynn. He was born in 1926, making him some 6 years older than Loretta. As the movie suggests, Do served in the 5th Ranger Battalion and fought from D-Day through to the end of the war in Europe. And he was one of only 6 survivors of his original platoon. And how many men would a platoon start with if they ended with 6?
At full strength, you're looking somewhere between 20 and 30. Different armies and different units would vary, but yeah, a platoon would normally be 3 sections of 8 in the British Army, plus a platoon commander and a platoon sergeant. So yeah, sort of mid-20s. So that's a lot of dead comrades.
Yeah.
That's from D-Day through to the end of the war.
That's right. Thanks, Marty. According to the book, The Coal Miner's Daughter, did return to Butcher's Hollow just as shown in the movie, making a big public show, showing off his wares, his skills and abilities in an army jeep. So all bang on at the moment.
Yeah. Now that jeep is obviously his personal vehicle, and I did, because we sort of go on later. We'll reveal that Do was a little bit of a not a wild boy so much, but he was quite happy to sail quite close to the wind of the of legal constraints. Yeah. I have heard stories before of, now these were this was a supply sergeant who sent parts of a Willis Jeep home from the Second World War, one part at a time, in just not Liberty packages, but sending stuff home. And when he got home at the end of the war, he was able to build 3 Jeeps out of the parts he sent, because they were modular. They were designed to be, to be able to be just taken apart and reassembled. Yeah. So that did make me wonder if maybe Do had done something like that, or he just bought it, or possibly stole it. I'm not sure. Yeah. And it's also worth pointing out as we go through this movie, Sissy Spacek plays Loretta from a mid-teenager, early to mid-teenager, through to a grown woman in her 30s, and she's so convincing. At no stage you go, "Oh, she doesn't look 14." You think, well, she could be, and at the end of the movie, you're not thinking, "Oh, she doesn't look 35," or whatever age she's meant to be. It really is incredible.
She's very slightly built, just like Loretta Lynn herself is, and so I guess she can pull off that teenager for a bit. And no, you're right, she did a great job, and well-deserved winner of the Best Actress award for the Oscars of that year.
Indeed. So back to the movie, and Doolin, we'll refer to Mooney Doolittle from here on as Do. He's talking to an old friend, Lee Dollarhide, played by William Sanderson, which is not a name that necessarily people will immediately be able to put a face to, but if you have a look online, you'll quickly recognise him. He's a stalwart of this sort of movie. Lee Dollarhide tries to recruit Do to his moonshine business. He tells him, in Kentucky, you have 3 choices: the coal mine, the moonshine, or moving on down the line. Do chooses not to join Dollarhide, which proves a good choice, as the moonshiner is shot dead in the next scene. And then we cut to Loretta singing a younger sibling to sleep. Do has noticed her and taken a clear shine. Sorry, I kind of skipped over someone being shot dead. I think it's Do who actually finds his body, but he's up in the hills. Yeah. He's basically been, bushwhacked, as the Aussies would call it. And anyway, back to the movie. At a local dance, Do volunteers his services to act as an auctioneer for pies. These pies are made by local ladies, and they're made by the attendees, and they have their little name attached to it. The last pie is a chocolate one, which was made by Loretta, and Do ends up bidding himself, paying an outrageous $5 for Loretta's pie, purely so he gets the chance to talk to her, because he has noticed her. Turns out that it's quite disgusting. He takes a mouthful, spits it out, and says, "How much salt did you put in that?" She said, "It's a chocolate pie, there's no salt in it." And then they both sort of look at each other and realise that she's used salt instead of sugar. So it's inedible. However, Do offers Loretta a ride in his Jeep. She refuses, so he walks her home. They talk about the war, Do's determination not to be a miner all his life, because he has taken a job down the mines, and then he kisses her goodnight. So, probably quite a reasonable period covered there. How did they do?
They did very, very well. That's other than the Dollarhide character, all of that happened as portrayed in the movie, happened in the book. They did have the additional nickname of Mooney, because he did try moonshining for a while, so him toying with the idea isn't ridiculous. Then the bit at the local dance, and the whole thing with the chocolate pie, with the mistaken salt, and the walk home, and the stolen kiss, that's all there in the opening chapters of Loretta Lynn's book, Coal Miner's Daughter. But the only thing they miss out is that for the dance, her first dance, Loretta did get herself a nice new dress and was showing that off as well, but that's really accurate.
In fact, I think I forgot to mention, I think she did have I think her parents bought her, or her mother made her a dress or something.
That's right. I think that's
yeah,
what I
that is
recall.
shown. Yeah, wow, good for
Oh,
them.
is it? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm sure.
Skip that.
And her dad says, you know, you're going to your first dance or something. You know, you need to have a new dress or something. And Leavenhelm plays the part wonderfully, and you do get the feeling he's strict, but he is a very loving father.
They're loving, yeah.
However, Do eventually persuades Loretta to go for a ride in his Jeep, and they're off shooting around the hills, driving around, and it's after dark when they get back, and Loretta's father is furious, and Ted actually beats her with a stick. Now, this is not a big, heavy, like, log stick. It's a switch, but he does give her a whack. Both he and Loretta's mother warning her about cavorting with that wild boy. The next day, Ted, Loretta's father, warns her again, but Loretta says she loves Stu and he's asked her to marry him. And at this stage, we learn she's not quite 14, according to the movie. The Webb family are then spending an evening listening to music on the radio when Stu arrives. They turn the radio off, the younger kids are sent away, as Stu offers Loretta to marry her the next day. He says he's been saving his paychecks and he shows her a roll of dollar bills. He goes to speak to Ted Webb and asks his permission to marry his daughter tomorrow. Ted's answer is, go and ask her mother. So Stu goes off to another part of the house and asks her mother, and she says, oh, go and ask her father. So he's a little bit confused. On Loretta's advice, he waits until the couple have gone to bed, and then he catches them together, and he makes a good pitch, and they sort of accept, but Ted warns him, don't you ever hit her, and don't take her miles away from home. Stu agrees to both counts. So, now there's a little bit of confusion about the age, isn't there? But the quick romance and proposal does seem to be accurate.
It is, and the parental disapproval was, exactly as they show in the movie. She's too young, and they don't approve of Stu. He's a wild boy. But it was Loretta's mother, I think, more than her father, that gave her the stern talking to about being far too young. But in the end, Loretta said, you can't stop me because I will just run away with him, we'll elope and get married. So they reluctantly agree, we can't stop her, so let's give her our blessing as weak-willed as we can make it. And the line about don't hit my daughter and keep her close to home, that's accurate, exactly what Ted wanted. And the thing about the age, look, there's been, at the time of the movie, everybody thought that Loretta was 13 when she got married, but what had happened, out of vanity I guess, Loretta Lynn had added a couple of years to her birth year. So she was actually 15 at this time, and Stu was 21. So, even though 15 is terribly young to get married, and you probably still need your parents' consent for that to happen, it's not as outrageous as 13, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even 15 is to a 21st century, Brit. It's quite shocking that
Yeah, same here.
That only sort of 70 years ago this was acceptable. But hey, different times, different culture. But yeah, she was labelled as a very young mother as well, wasn't she? Because she was 18 when she had her first child, but at the time people thought, or at the time of the movie, people thought she was 16.
16 when she had her first, yeah.
Which is horrendously young.
Yes.
Anyway, back to the movie. The couple are in church and they get married the next day. They have no rings, and the only attendees are a couple of elderly women who apparently have been dragged in as witnesses. But then during the ceremony, Loretta's father turns up at the church door to reluctantly give her away, and he does still look unhappy. They spend their first night in a motel. Loretta is distressed by what Stu expects from the marital bed, and the next morning she's unhappy and angry. Stu tries to calm her by bringing her a breakfast tray from a diner, but by the time he gets back to the room, it's cold, and they start a shouting match which leads to Stu slapping her. She reminds him of his promise to her dad. The next day, Stu returns from the mine with a blackened face to a cheerful Loretta, and he hands her a book entitled Sex for Newlyweds, but she's foiled by all those long words. She says she doesn't need a book, just a little more time.
Need a little more time to learn how to clean the damn house. Plus, you need a little more time to learn how to love your man the way you're supposed to. Goddamn, is there anything that you know how to do right now?
When are you gonna get me that wedding ring? Stop making that noise. You sound like old bear growling. Where are you going? Bill, are you leaving?
No. I ain't leaving.
There's no big argument, but next we see Loretta returning to her parents' home, telling them that her and Do have separated. And the next we see she's at the doctor's. In town, she leaves the doctor's surgery and sees Doolittle arriving in his Jeep, and her face lights up. But then she sees another woman run across to him saying, "Hey, Do, how you doing?" And this woman jumps into the Jeep. Loretta runs up, calls her a sow, and chases her off with a stick in her hand, which is quite funny. Do says to her, "Look, I'm leaving. I'm heading to Washington State because this mine's going to kill me. Why don't you come with me?" Again, she reminds him of his promise to her dad, but he says she has to decide if she's Ted's daughter or Do's wife. At this point, Loretta reveals the reason she'd been to the doctor, and she's pregnant. And the next thing we see is Loretta gets a letter from Do, who has gone to Washington State. He sent the money for her to go and join him. So he's good to his word. He hasn't just run off. At a railway station, her dad sees her off on the train, and as they hug, he tells her she won't ever see him again. So that's quite a poignant sort of... It's a lot happening there, a lot to unpack, but the end scene definitely poignant. But the lonely wedding and reluctant father, a little bit overplayed, maybe?
Well, I thought that initially, and then I went and had another look and did a bit more research, and the parents weren't even there. They were still very unhappy about this. They did not attend her wedding, so he clearly wasn't happy, which they get across in the movie, don't they? That whole first night scene as a married couple, with Loretta having no idea about sex or what was expected of her, is spot on. She had no experience in that department and was shocked at what Do was expected to happen on that evening and beyond. There is an event in the book here where Do manhandles her and pushes her, which they portray, but Loretta says that this was a rare event, and she had this line that she said, if ever he hit me, I always hit him back with twice as much, or something like that, but we'll get to that again later. The sex ed scene where he provides a book on sexual education, I don't remember that, but it's a nice little touch, I guess. But the more dramatic event where he pushes her out or throws her out of their home and she goes back to her parents, and then he reappears with her pregnant and he's got this other woman that's chasing him, that's all bang on too, exactly as portrayed in the book. So they're doing a great job at getting those details right. So he did then go off to Washington State for a while, couple of months maybe, and then eventually he sent some money, and Loretta followed, and her father did take her to the train station, and would have uttered those words, he might not see her again. But so again, that's all pretty accurate.
Yeah, and it is worth pointing out that Loretta wasn't illiterate by any stretch, but she wasn't a fluent reader. And when you consider that she would go on to write some of the most iconic country music songs there have ever been, it just shows the remarkable journey and the remarkable talent that the lady has. So, back to the movie, we see an older Loretta surrounded by several children singing away around a kitchen as Do is working in a logging camp up in the hills. They're living in a large wooden house, alone up in the hills, and there are 4 kids. They put the kids to bed, and Do asks Loretta what she'd like as a present, as it's their anniversary coming up. She says she still has no wedding ring. So the next day, Do heads into town. He arrives home a little bit drunk and says to Loretta he's got her a present. Expecting a ring, she's slightly surprised when she sees it's a guitar. She protests that she doesn't know how to play it, to which Do replies, with some wisdom, "No one knows how to play it until they learn, but I just love the way you sing." We then see Loretta learning to play on her porch, hesitant at first and then in subsequent clips becoming more and more proficient with the guitar and with a very clear, distinctive singing voice. So we've leapt forward several years now. They're obviously up in Washington State, and they've got a number of kids. So
The book, of course, dwells more on her first pregnancy and birth, and then the succession of kids that follow, and how tough their life is, and how Do would be gone for long periods of time, and they'd have to really make do and literally live off what they can forage off the land. But they were doing it hard, and they had 4 kids, and the youngest would have been about 4 or 5 at this stage. And the real the real scene in there is when Do produces a guitar because he thinks he's got faith in her singing abilities, and that is all bang on. An anniversary present. Do comes home with a guitar, gives it to Loretta, and says she should learn how to play it. So again, kudos to them because that's exactly as portrayed in the book.
Yeah. And the encouragement that Do gives her throughout, even when later on we'll see it's not that he's unhappy with Loretta's success, but he's a bit unhappy with his very subservient role or subordinate role in it. But he still consistently encourages her, which is great to see.
Yeah.
So, and back in the movie, we see the next stage of that. Do tells Loretta they're going to get a babysitter and head out to a honky tonk that weekend. Which I believe a honky tonk is a bar that plays music, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Loretta, I'm sure there are American listeners laughing at me for explaining that, but some people may not know. So Loretta knows that Do's up to something and she's laughing as she tries to guess what it is. What he's done is set her up to sing with a resident band at a dancing club, but as soon as she realises, she runs away, shrieking, but sort of laughing, shrieking, but going, no, I can't do this. Do admits that he's proud of her when she sings, and she says, I can't play for strangers, but eventually persuades her to take the stage. She's very nervous until she starts singing, and then kind of loses herself in the music. The audience keep dancing, tapping their feet along to the tune, and Loretta receives encouraging nods and grins from the other band members. She finishes the song to rapturous applause and is persuaded to sing another song. Back home, she starts thinking of tunes and lyrics all of her own. Do tells her that to make it, they need to make a record and need to get it played. She asks him how he's suddenly become such an expert on the music industry, and again, with this sort of disarming honesty but wisdom, he says, I'm not, I'm just learning as I'm going along. And we see Do in a recording studio with Loretta and backing players in a sound booth as they launch into a first self-written song, I'm a Honky Tonk Girl. But Loretta stumbles over the opening line. She's clearly not comfortable. Understanding his wife's mindset, Do brings the kids into the sound booth and says, just sing to the kids like you do at home. And she nails it. And then again, being aware of how this system sort of works or the industry works, we see Do in an improvised home studio taking photographs of Loretta, presumably for promotional reasons. So he is certainly trying to boost her into the music industry. How are they doing?
Yeah, good. I mean, in the book, Loretta goes to great lengths to say how shy, how uneducated, how unbrash she was, and it took a lot of coaxing by Do to get her that single song with a band in a bar somewhere. But they showed that in the movie, and that's correct. Just it took a long time for the shy girl from the country to get the confidence to do that. But then she does get to do her first single in a studio, but she's got her own band by now, so she's got a little bit of success performing, and the band is called the Trailblazers, which includes her brother, Jay Lee Webb, who's come over from Kentucky as well.
Right.
So she was a bit more accomplished than what they're saying in the movie, but she did record with a bunch of blokes, and the song was Honky Tonk Woman. A Honky Tonk Girl, I beg your pardon, and she starts to get her first success, which we can feel is coming from the movie. In reality, she'd appeared on a TV show in Washington State. It was a talent show, and she won a wristwatch for her efforts. And at this point in time, she meets a Canadian businessman called Norm Burley. And Burley loved the song, he loved Loretta, he wanted to do whatever he could to get her started in showbiz. And he decided there and then that he'd start a record label, even though he had no background in the music industry. He was in the lumber industry of all things, and his new record label, Zero Records, signed Loretta as their one and only client at that point in time. And it was on Zero Records that she did release that single, Honky Tonk Girl. Years later, when she became successful enough to be poached by a record giant, Decca Records, Burley happily ripped up her contract and let her go because all he wanted all this was for Loretta's success. So a very generous and influential person in her career. Other than ignoring the role of Burley, which is an oversight, most of all the fans, they love this movie for all the other attention to detail that they went to, including filming around her hometown of Butcher's Hollow. As we've said, Sissy Spacek does all the singing that they show in the film, and this was after that she'd been on tour with Loretta and her band for almost a year to learn about what she does, to pick up on her mannerisms, to get her voice right. And as Martin's already said, the actor that played her father was a well-known country artist in his first acting role. And the musicians playing with Loretta here and from here on in the movie are actually members of Loretta's band in the 1980 when this film was made. And as you will see later, there's a bunch of famous country artists that appear as themselves in the movie, and so another reason why the fans would, country western fans would love this film. I don't recall the scene about the kids coming in to calm her down, but it is a nice little touch about how homespun she actually is.
Yeah.
So I think they're doing a pretty good job sticking to the facts as we know them.
Yeah, it's a shame that they didn't introduce Norm Burley, because that's such a philanthropic thing for him to have done, such a generous thing to have done, and then happy with her success, not trying to, make money off the back of it, and just says, yeah, waves are on her way. But I guess, that would add time and cost and everything to the movie.
Yeah, that's right. And later on in the movie, she signs up with a troupe that are managing, I forget they are, a couple of brothers, and when she wants to move on to own the rights of all of her own stuff, they fight her, and it becomes very acrimonious. So they've also omitted that, the good and the bad relationship she had with managers. But yeah, as you say, it's a reasonably long film as it is, and they can't cram everything in there, can they?
No, indeed. So, back to the movie. Just as Loretta looks to be breaking into the nationwide country scene, she learns that her dad has died. She and Do head down to Kentucky for the funeral, Do feeling guilty for having taken Loretta away from her family, and Loretta feeling guilty for having agreed to go. At her dad's grave, Loretta and Do talk about their future. Do says to her, look, if we want to make it in the country scene, most radio stations that play our kind of music are right here where we grew up in Kentucky. He says they should move back, but he won't make her do anything she doesn't want to. We see what her decision was as their kids are dropped off with Loretta's mum, and Loretta and Do hit the road to start touring radio stations trying to persuade them to play Loretta's songs. At their first visit, a DJ called Bobby Day says, I got your song, I played it, it wasn't very well received. In the background, Do is leafing through the mail inbox and he sees their envelope unopened with the record inside it. So he challenges Bobby, and he doesn't directly threaten violence, but there is an undercurrent of, yeah, you lied to us and I'm not happy about that. So they bully him into playing the song, which is I'm a Honky Tonk Girl, and they're off and running. They work well together, Do, or Mooney as we learn most people now call him. Loretta calls him Do though, so we'll stick with that for simplicity. He gives Loretta's charm some quietly muscular support. They stop for food at one point, and Loretta says, I'm bored of bologna, but Do says bologna makes folk horny. And if you do that in a Kentucky accent, I guess it rhymes. Loretta doesn't know what horny means, and he won't tell her, laughing. But then he has to tell her after she uses the word in a radio interview, unaware of its meaning. As they're thrown out of the station, a DJ runs out and says, look, never mind about using inappropriate words in interviews. Are you aware that your song is number 14 in the national charts? So they drive off into the night very happy, as on the radio we hear Patsy Cline's song Crazy, which is probably, to an international audience at least, Patsy Cline's best known song.
Yeah,
so, yeah, I mean, a sad opening to that sequence of scenes with Loretta's father dying in 59.
Yeah, and that's about right. This would be, when you're looking at the timeline of her breaking through, it would be about 1959, and that is the year that her father died, so that all syncs up. Then the subsequent scene of her, the couple touring around rural America, that's pretty good too. Again, as Hollywood tends to do, they compress the time associated with this, and the DJ Bobby Day is not a real character, but he is a very good representation of all the country music DJs in the South and Midwest of the USA. Do and Loretta absolutely toured this Heartland for a long time and continue to do so after they were successful. They'd drop in on DJs, they'd chat with them, they'd build rapport, they'd become correspondents with each other, they'd issue records out to this network of DJs, and for years they cultivated this sort of grassroots support for Loretta's career, and as we'll see, it really paid off. The bit about baloney equaling horny, I don't think that was mentioned in the book from what I recall, but it is a nice comic relief scene in the movie.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I mean, when you just say that about the fact that even after they made it really big, they still continued to tour these radio stations and meeting the DJs, some of whom presumably became friends and certainly would have been fans and admirers. It's just a really nice touch, because it means they weren't just using them to make it big and then it's like, right, we don't need you anymore. They weren't rungs on a ladder, it just...
The book goes to great lengths to talk about how down-to-earth she is, how grassroots she is, how the fans are her number one priority, and the movie hints that there's a dark side to the fans. They can get a bit demanding, as we'll see, and that definitely comes out in the book. But up until recent years, when her health suffered, they held a free concert over a weekend every week for years at their Tennessee ranch, and she, goes to great lengths to say that she'll talk and stop and correspond with fans and DJs whenever she could, because she understands that it's the fans that put her where she is.
Yeah, I mean, it literally is a rags to riches story, so
yeah.
No, that's great. So, back in the movie, and Do and Loretta pull up the Grand Ole Opry, and we know that they've arrived in Nashville, Tennessee, certainly today seen by most people as the home of country music. We're told that Loretta will be on stage soon, and again, she's very nervous. We see Loretta relax as soon as she starts singing, which again is this pattern of pre-stage nerves. As soon as she gets up there and gets into the music, she's fine. Dude's at the bar and he's trying to hear Loretta sing on the radio, because I think he left the actual room in which she's playing because it was rammed. And he keeps telling other punters to be quiet because he's trying to listen to his wife. Inevitably, in a room full of drunken Stetson-wearing country fans, he ends up in a punch-up, but there's no real harm done, and Loretta is jubilant as she's invited back the following week. Her reply is, "I ain't got nothing else planned." We then see her playing the Opry again, and she's singing a Patsy Cline song and mentions that Patsy is in hospital after a bad car crash. After the gig, Patsy's husband, Charlie Dick, introduces himself and says, "Look, Patsy heard you singing and wishing her well, and she'd like to meet you." So we meet the famous Patsy Cline, played by Beverly D'Angelo, and it's fair to say she's not looking her best. She's a bit beaten up from this car crash. Loretta is worried that Patsy will be annoyed that she sang her song, but Patsy replies she's only worried that folk will think Loretta sang it better. We then learn that Loretta has played the Opry 17 weeks straight, and in the next scene we see Patsy playing her own set at the Opry, bantering with Charlie Dick and reminding him he's not just a husband, but he's also a tax deduction. Loretta laughs, but Do looks a little bit miffed at this. So
why don't we just...
Yeah, let's wrap up where we got to with that.
Yeah, so suddenly she's playing the Grand Ole Opry, and it seems that that's too quick to get that measure of success. But she did wow them at the Opry. She did perform week after week, as the movie suggests. And I wasn't sure what this Grand Ole Opry was. I might have thought it was a building, an opera building or a theatre, but turns out it's not so much a place, but it's a troupe. It's a stage for country stars that started as an act in the 1920s and grew to a very important Saturday night radio broadcast. And it became a permanent cast of musicians with the occasional guest appearance, as Loretta's is shown in the movie. As the movie shows, she does become an Opry favourite very quickly and became a full member of the ensemble in 1962. So they got that bit right. And the Beverly D'Angelo playing Patsy Cline, the meeting there, I don't know if... probably given the track record so far, she probably did have a car accident and been hospitalised, but I just can't recall exactly the circumstances of their meeting. But they did meet, and as we'll see soon, they became great friends.
Yeah. So back to the movie. The next thing we see, a coach driving along a road with the Patsy Cline show written down the side. So Patsy's on the road, and Loretta is now with her as a supporting act. Do as well, not as a supporting act, but on the coach. So Patsy is going on stage and reminds Loretta that she's next up. They're singing an open-air venue and it's raining. Loretta has put some makeup on, much to Doo's annoyance, and he orders her to take it off, and she just looks at him and says, no. Later that night, the show cast are ready to leave on the coach, but they can't find Doo. Loretta, knowing her husband, I guess, finds him in the back of a strange car canoodling with a woman. She drags him out, gives the woman a piece of her mind and warns Doo not to do that again. And he says, you don't get to warn me about anything. He's angry and or embarrassed, but Loretta the next morning is playing a song to Patsy, practising as the coach drives along, about loose women trying to prize husbands away from their wives and how she won't stand for it. She and Doo fight again, and he's clearly struggling with the backstage role. They talk calmly later, Loretta reminding him that she wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for him, but Doo replies, getting here's one thing, being here is another. And he says, I may go and get a job doing something I'm good at. Loretta says that if it's going to break them up, she'll quit, but Doo tells her successful people don't quit. He offers her something, and she sees that finally she's getting a wedding ring. They hug, and things seem certainly better. It's almost, it's a bit of a watershed moment, I think. So she's gone on tour with Patsy Cline, which obviously with 4 young children, it must be quite challenging. And Doo's reaction to makeup and basically playing second fiddle, he's like a manager. How did they do?
Yeah. Oh, they did very well. I mean, we've already seen a fight between the couple more than once, and they typically are hot-headed. They have a fight, and then they make up very quickly, as this scene shows, and that happened a lot. They had a tempestuous relationship. They would fight. Doo would womanize, as the film shows, but they'd patch it all up and stick together. The scenes where we can see Patsy and Loretta becoming friends, that's all accurate. She did take Loretta under her wing, and Patsy taught her the tricks of the trade, and not just how to look good and how to wear makeup, but how to be a successful woman in a man's show business. That's all quite good. The bit about the womanizing, as I say, is correct, and we do see Loretta was inspired by this in the future, whether it was the next day or not, I'm not sure, and she wrote her song. The song that she wrote at the time is called "You Ain't Woman Enough to Take My Man." They're all very accurate, I think.
I do like one of the song titles of. She writes, it's "Don't come home a drinking with lovin' on your mind."
That's one of the early ones.
We'll look at this a bit later on when we talk about the fans' relationship with her on the subject matter of her songs. So and one thing that I think we do have to say, the movie plays down the level and frequency of domestic violence between them. She always says that she gave as good as she got, but as you said, she's a very small lady. She's not big, and I think Doo was quite a physically powerful man. So it's you can't say it's a sign of the times, but I suspect it was more normal than abnormal, around the middle of last century. So it's a difficult one to sort of. Have Hollywood brushed it under the carpet, or is it just, look, that's not the story we're telling? I'm not sure.
Well, the tone of it is very faithful to the book. So she said, we had our troubles, and we'd fight, and he'd push me around, but I'd always give him twice as many smacks as he gave me, and that's about as detailed as she gets. Very deflectory, just deflecting everything, and as you say, probably that reflects the kind of walked into a door mentality of 50, 60 years ago. But as we say, her being sassy and fighting back. Whenever he hit her, that's no excuse for hitting her in the first place, is it?
No, indeed. So back in the movie, we see Doo working as a mechanic as Loretta is on the radio singing her song about loose women. Loretta and Patsy are in Patsy's house, and Loretta reveals she's pregnant again, but she isn't sure she wants to keep him, or it. Patsy won't hear of any such thing and digs out her own maternity clothes, saying, right, we're about the same size, these clothes will get you through, the early months, then you'll need to move on to these ones, then these ones. And she seems really excited about Loretta going to be a mother again. And Patsy says, look, I'm off to a concert in Kansas City, but I'll call you on Monday. So next we see Stu and Loretta in bed, and the radio's on, and the announcer says that Patsy Cline has been killed in a plane crash. Loretta is absolutely devastated, but we almost instantly cut forward to Loretta in a hospital bed with Stu beside her, and they've had twin girls. They both decide they're going to be called Peggy and Patsy. Stu realises they'll need a bigger house, and Loretta tells him she'll be going back to work just as soon as she can. So we cut straight back to the Grand Ole Opry, and Loretta, looking more mature now, is on stage with a packed house. She now has her own coach and is touring, selling records and clearly doing very well. And there's a new house, and Stu has himself a new Jeep. So before we go into the, this is really Loretta finding big success. Let's just wrap up the reality of those scenes.
Yeah, sure. It starts off with Stu walking away from his manager job, and he was, as the movie shows, he was feeling like a fifth wheel at this point in time, and it was actually the birth of the twins, which is accurately portrayed here, that caused Stu to take stock of himself and straighten out a little bit, and he became, the mother and father figure to both the girls growing up in their Tennessee house. They sort of suggest that Loretta is considering having an abortion because she doesn't want to have a fifth and, as it turns out, a sixth child, and that might even have a ring of truth to it. The topics of her songs were sometimes quite progressive, including one called "The Pill," extolling how good it was for women to get access to contraceptive pill, and she also, laments women that are always pregnant with her cheeky and amusing country western song "One's on the Way," which has got a constantly pregnant protagonist. And also around then, in 1966, she released a single called "Dear Uncle Sam," which is a clearly anti-Vietnam War song released at the height of that war. So, you've already mentioned, I think, how the nature of her tracks and the stuff that she penned herself was talking directly to women of her age. It wasn't, lamenting some disaster or a dead relative or a country and western complaint song. It was actually saying, my man's a drinking, he's womanizing, I've got too many kids and not enough time on my hands, and that she's speaking directly to her female audience, and that was a real innovation for country and western at the time.
Yeah, and the impression you get is it's a very conservative industry. It's very conservative with a small c. And I think Shania Twain was the first country and western album cover that showed a woman's belly. She had a short t-shirt and it showed her belly button, and that was the first time that had ever happened. And you think, wow, that was like late 90s or early 2000s. So it's quite a so the courage and the power of her success to be able to get away with singing with things like this, you can sort of, it just makes you understand it. And going back to the movie, we now see the song after song, concert venue after concert venue, and fans hounding Loretta, and many of the women yelling to her exactly what we've just been saying, that her songs really speak to them. She's writing songs about what it's like to be a real woman, wife and mother, and it's clearly hitting the mark. Back at the big house, Stu and the kids are feeding horses when Loretta's coach arrives. The twins, Peggy and Patsy, are now 5 or 6. So again, we've jumped forward a few years. And the older kids are old enough to be driving cars around the farm and crashing them in some cases, although Stu's quick to point out that they're not hurt. Loretta tells Stu that she wants him to come on tour with her again. He says, come on, you don't need me. There are folk fighting to take care of you. But she says, no, I need you. I need my husband with me. The next scene sees Loretta heading out on stage and Stu backstage looking on. Later on the coach, Stu watches a couple of the crew counting cash, and he's aware they're doing very well. Loretta records a new song, she's sleeping on a couch, she has a coach surrounded by adoring fans, and she looks absolutely shattered. Stu leads her to the latest venue, but Loretta looks close to collapse. He says, look, there's thousands of fans out there waiting to sing for you. She cries a bit, and she says, I need you to tell me what to do. And he says, I can't say anything other than get the hell out there and sing for the folks. She says, okay, and takes the stage. So I guess on the reality front of there, we see the pressure of constantly touring, fans demanding autographs, demanding photographs. So if they did such things, then they didn't have selfies, obviously. But you kind of get this idea that, wow, this is a punishing routine or regime to be following.
Yeah, and the book makes a great play of that. The constant touring, it wore her down. She had doubted herself, and she really regretted the fact that she left the twins back home, and she missed all their formative years. So her coming back when they're 5 or 6, that's probably how she would have felt. They would have grown up so fast without her. And she said in a documentary I saw that was her biggest regret, leaving the twins to do. It did straighten Do out, but she was robbed of the opportunity watching them grow up, she says. Yeah. And about the fans, she goes to great lengths in the book to say how important her fans were to her. She had some 3 sisters in California, I think, and every time she got near there, they were a great boost to her, and they ran her fan clubs for her and put a lot of work in. And she says how great her fans are, but as these scenes suggest, there is a darker side to fandom, isn't there? And that you're owned by the fans and you don't have any privacy. And we see that for a little bit, and then we get to this crisis of confidence where she needs to do, and she seems to be wavering before she gets on stage. I mean, those short series of scenes, they've gone from just the taste of success to great success and now a crisis. And that took years. It did happen, but of course it took years in real life where she found great success and pushed herself too hard, as we'll see in the next scene.
Yeah, and I think this scene, whether this actually happened or not, I think it sums it up. So we're in this venue. Do sort of persuade her, look, you owe it to those people. They've paid money to come see you. So she goes up to sing. But on stage, she speaks to the crowd and tells them through tears that things are moving too fast in her life, and they always have done. She tells them, I was a little girl, and then I was married and having babies, and now I'm out there singing for y'all. Patsy told her once that she had to run her own life, but Loretta realises that her life is now running her. She asks for Do, but then she breaks down and collapses. So he comes on stage and carries her away. And this is, yeah, as you just said, they pretty much, she's exhausted. We then see at the house, or the ranch to be more accurate, Loretta watches Do with their horses. He takes her a drive in a Jeep and he says he has something to show her. They stop on a hilltop and he asks her what she thinks. And she says, about what? And then she notices that Do has marked out an area of ground where he wants to build a house. And he says, look, and it's a beautiful view. It looks from this hilltop right across some valleys. And he says, it looks like Kentucky around here. And he's planned to put their bedroom at the front of the house so they can see the view. Loretta's angry that Do has once again, as she puts it, gone ahead and decided things for both of them. He says, well, if that's what she thinks, maybe she should get a lawyer and a divorce. She says, I don't want a divorce, but a bedroom has to be at the back of the house, not the front. Everyone knows that. And that's what the argument turns out to be about. But it pretty quickly becomes fairly playful banter, and they both end up backing down and agreeing with the other one and then saying, hey, we can have a bedroom at the front and one at the back. So it's really it's a brilliantly done scene, because it's sort of doesn't have great import. It's not a huge decision. It's going to build a new house, but I think it shows what a partnership they are, but also, that they're a pair of magnets, and sometimes the repelling poles line up and sometimes the attracting poles line up.
Yeah, that's true. But that is an accurate scene from, she did get, hot-headed with him, but of course, as the movie shows, many times it's a hot and cold affair, and they, quickly kiss and make up. I might just go back a bit to the collapse scene, which is a pretty big deal. And it comes on very quickly, as we've said. The movie barely touches on her emotional and physical problems. As the movie shows, she did collapse on stage and left touring for a long time to recuperate. In addition to their Tennessee ranch that we see in the movie, they moved to warmer climates to Mexico for a long time, a couple of years perhaps, to help her recuperate, and eventually they ended up buying a big house down in Mexico. One thing the movie hasn't mentioned and doesn't mention is Loretta believes herself to be of Indian stock, Native American stock. and three of her grandparents were Cherokee. And she makes a big play about how that means that her and her mother were a bit spiritual, in touch with nature, could see things from the other side or communicate with animals. And this, she says, helped her get an affinity for the indigenous Mexicans as well, down on her, what would eventually become her second ranch. During this illness, she was very frail. She lost a lot of weight as a result of her long years of touring. And as I say, it took her a long time to build up her strength and get back to touring. The movie gets the children right, even if they aren't mentioned in great detail. Her first child, Betty Sue, was born in 1949, well before she found fame in the early to mid-60s. And the fifth and sixth children are correctly portrayed, as Martin's already mentioned in the movie, Peggy and Patsy. And the bit where they're bashing around their property trying to find a place for the new house in a Jeep, that is a bit of a nice echo back to the first meeting in Butcher's Hollow when Doo was in an army Jeep.
Yeah, well, this is pretty much the denouement of the movie, because we see Loretta back on stage and she's singing The Coal Miner's Daughter, a semi-autobiographical song and a tribute to her father. And as she sings, you know, we didn't have much money, but he made sure we had love. And as the song plays out, we see scenes from the early stages of the movie and Loretta's life as the credits roll. And that is the end of the movie. And yeah, I mean, I had no idea till I... I need to go back to one bit, because I was just going to say about the... I listened to... do you know what? I can't remember what it was called. It's an audiobook, and it's a far more recently written book by Loretta Lynn about her and Patsy Cline and their friendship. Me and Patsy Kicking Up Dust. And in there, it becomes apparent that the birth of Peggy and Patsy was, I think, 18 months after Patsy Cline was killed in the plane crash. So although Patsy's death is portrayed accurately, she wouldn't have known that these twins were coming along. However, that doesn't at all take away from the tribute that Loretta was paying to her by naming one of them Patsy. Doo died in August 1996, 5 days before his 70th birthday, and some 16 years after the movie came out. He died from heart problems associated with diabetes, buried on their estate, but they did remain happily, or maybe not, but consistently married until he died. And it is, there is a romance there, albeit tempered by some abuse of alcohol and each other.
Yeah, there's that quote that we found from Martha Hume that might be appropriate to reference now about Doo and Loretta's marriage. Shall we drop it in here, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in 2008, musical scholar and country and western expert Martha Hume, she wrote this about Doo and Loretta's marriage. When you shake all the stardust off this tale, what you must begin with is an uneducated girl from one of the most isolated cultures in the United States, who was given in marriage to a man some 6 years her senior, a man who was a violent and sometimes brutal alcoholic, who was similarly uneducated and without any job skills to speak of. Add to that a migration to the state of Washington, where the child had no friends or relations, the arrival of 4 babies, regular and reported mutual domestic violence, and an income so unstable that there were times when the family had nothing to eat but dandelion greens, and you have a situation that might well have led to murder. But what actually happened was so improbable, so unimaginable, that the lives of Loretta and Mooney Lynn became one of the great legends of the 20th century. That sums it up pretty well, I think.
It does. I mean, I don't know, and I'm certainly no expert on Loretta or Doo, and we've done some research, but I'm not sure I'd describe him as an alcoholic. He was a regular drinker, but that was the culture in which he lived, and I'm not sure that he was one of the... he was someone who needed a slug of whiskey when he first got up in the morning to face the day, which is how I would think of it as an alcoholic. I mean, it certainly played a part in his life, but yeah, I do completely get what Martha Hume means there. You start off with this, the ingredients are there for it to make a disaster, and actually what we've got is, what many would argue is the first lady of country music. The foreword to the Me and Patsy Kicking Up Dust book is Dolly Parton, and she says, that she's greatly honoured when people consider her one of the matriarchs of country music, but she very much says that Loretta's there with her. The statistics on her career. Now, you did mention that in your research you found out that the movie ignores much of her later career and the collaboration with Conway Twitty, who's someone I've never heard of.
Oh, haven't you? Yeah, I knew of him. I knew the name, but not much else.
It's a man.
Yeah, it's a man. Right. And the one thing they're missing, because the movie does touch on the 1970s, it was released in 1980, was that Conway Twitty became her singing partner, a country western collaborator, and they had 5 consecutive #1 hits on the Billboard country music charts. And of course, the movie ends in real time around 1980, which was 40 years ago after all. So what happened to her career after that? Well, she continued to have a successful career after Dew passed away as well. In 2004, Loretta released the very successful album Van Lear Rose, where she either wrote or co-wrote every song. The album was produced by Jack White of the White Stripes, and he featured on the album doing guitar work and backup vocals, and that album went on to win the Grammy for Best Country Album of the Year.
And they've got a lovely friendship, haven't they? You've got this sort of indie, out there rock guitarist with his own, indie band, and young enough to be her grandson, I'd imagine, certainly her son, and they've become incredibly close friends, which is, I don't know, it's just lovely, I think.
Yeah, I had no idea about that. And even then, later on in 2010, Sony released a tribute album titled Coal Miner's Daughter, a tribute to Loretta Lynn. And that album featured performances by Kid Rock, Reba McEntire, Sheryl Crow, and the White Stripes, as well as Faith Hill, amongst others. So she's, touching a whole bunch of contemporary rockers there with their tribute.
And certainly in the March 2016 release Full Circle features Willie Nelson and Elvis Costello, who was a musician I loved when I was growing up. British, sort of very influenced by jazz, but he was kind of punk to new wave, and so she's had 40 albums that have made the top 10 on Billboard's country and western list.
Yeah, performing over 5 decades. 5 decades she's been performing. Bringing us up to date, she did have the stroke in 2007, and that prompted her to 2017, sorry, thanks. And that prompted her to cancel her scheduled tour that she was about to embark on at the age of 85. She is still with us in her Tennessee estate, but I'm sure she's in fairly frail health. Do you want to list off some of the awards that she's gotten over her career?
Yeah, so 10 #1 albums, 16 #1 singles on the country charts, 3 Grammy Awards, 7 American Music Awards, 13 Academy of Country Music Awards, 8 Country Music Association Awards, and she is the most awarded woman in country music. She was the first woman in country music to receive a gold album for 1967's Don't Come Home A-Drinkin' with Lovin' on Your Mind, which is just a great title. And in 1972 was the first woman to be named Entertainer of the Year by the Country Music Association. In 1988, she was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, and in 2013, she received a Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama. And to this day, Loretta still lives in a Tennessee ranch that she and Dew built.
What a great life.
Incredible woman. I mean, like we said, there is nothing faked about, when she sings about being dirt poor, she lived that life. She knew that life. So there's no, let's pretend that, I know what it's like to be a normal person. Yeah, she does. Scores.
Yeah, neither of us are country western fans, and neither of us had seen this movie. I'm glad I watched it. I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10. I'd definitely give it a 7 for entertainment.
I think for me, I can't really go higher than a 7, because I will be honest, if I wasn't on this show, I almost certainly wouldn't have watched it, however well it portrays her life and however important Loretta Lynn is to an awful lot of music fans. I do have to share this with you that I just noticed someone posted something the other day, and it's some comedian from the 60s or 70s, and he said, look, just because I don't like country music doesn't mean I'm denigrating the people who do. And for the people who do like country music, denigrating means putting down. Which, yeah, okay. So there is this, there's this international, or this sort of global perception of the hillbilly culture with the banjo playing and you know, semi-literate, and we saw it in Larry Flint, and he wore it as a badge of honour, and I believe to a degree Loretta Lynn does. She's proud of where she came from. But it is an alien culture to someone like me and someone like you. We're not country music fans, so I can't give it more than a 7. But if I was a country music fan, I'd probably be screaming it's a 9 at least. So
yeah, that's a good point.
The 7 isn't a reflection of the fact that it's badly acted, or you know, it's not. It's brilliantly acted. I mean, really startlingly brilliantly acted. And it's got good narrative, it's got good flow, it's got funny bits, it's got moving bits. But just simply because of the subject matter, for me, it's 7.
And I agree with the 7, but that's more than I would have guessed before I watched it. So that's a tribute to the film. And what about historically? I think it's quite accurate. I think it's very accurate, given that how it stuck to the book.
Yeah, you led the research on this. Now, they do downplay some of the darker aspects, but they are making a movie that they want to entertain people. So, you know...
And they did miss out some of the key players that helped her career in what would have been a very good news story about her initial contract with Zero Records. But I think I'll give it an 8 for historical accuracy, which is pretty good after all. It's an A, Mark.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with an 8. And what it doesn't do, which is what I probably would want to condemn it for, it doesn't sugarcoat Loretta Lynn herself. You know, it doesn't. She's not this sort of saint. She's a tough lady who had a remarkable talent, and through her and Du's determination, you know, was managed to fulfil that talent. So it does, but it doesn't. You know, it doesn't make her out to be anything that she doesn't seem to be, from what, you know, research we've been able to do. And she does seem to be one of those people that when she talks to a fan, that fan believes they're the only person in the world that's important to her at that moment in time. And that's
very true.
Well, it's what gives people star quality, I guess, and makes her immensely popular, and thoroughly deservedly so. So, yeah, no, it was a good film.
Yeah, I'm glad we did it. Shall we wrap it up at this point in time?
I think we should. So next time out, all being well, we will be joined by Chris Wimmer from Infamous America and Legends of the Old West podcast series. Chris is joining us to cover Young Guns. Now, he is ridiculously busy at the moment. He's juggling about 6 or 7 different projects at the same time. So just in case we have to slip that one a little bit, we may come in with The Highwayman, which will be Andrew and I back. And this is the story of the 2 retired Texas Rangers who were sent out after Bonnie and Clyde. So this is kind of the flip side of the coin of the Bonnie and Clyde episode that Andrew did so wonderfully. Was that last year or the year before?
Early last year, yes.
Early
February,
last year,
I think.
yeah.
Yep.
So that will be a nice juxtaposition for the Bonnie and Clyde movie. But hopefully it'll be Young Guns next, and then The Highwayman. So we are doing 2 American Law and Order movies on the bounce. So after that, I think we're going to come in with something a little bit more female focused, hopefully. But watch this space.
Okay, well, we'll call it a day then, I guess, Martin. Thanks for another good podcast.
Yeah, thanks, buddy, and speak to you soon.
Cheers.
2 years ago, I wrote a song called Coal Miner's Daughter. And I know a little bit about this girl because I just happen to be that coal miner's daughter. Well, I was born a coal miner's daughter in a cabin on a hill in Butcher Holler. We were poor, but we had love. That's the one thing that Daddy made sure of. shovel coal to make a poor man's dollar. My daddy worked all night in the Van Leer coal mines, all day long in a field of hoeing corn. Mommy rocked the babies at night and read the Bible by the coal oil light, and everything would start all over come break of dawn. Daddy loved and raised their kids on a miner's pay. Mommy scrubbed our clothes on a washboard every day. Well, I've seen her fingers bleed to complain there was no need. She'd smile in Mommy's understanding way. In the summertime, we didn't have shoes to wear, but in the wintertime, we'd all get a brand new pair. From a mail order catalog, money made from selling a hog, Eddie always managed to get the money somewhere. Yeah, I'm proud to be a coal miner's daughter. I remember well the well where I drew water. The work we done was hard. At night we'd sleep 'cause we were taught. I never thought